I'm Anne-Marie Rooney.
And I'm Julia Rooney, and we're sisters.
We currently have a show up called Flats at the artist-run gallery Essex Flowers in New York City.
The show comprises 15 years worth of correspondence, both visual and written, that we have sent entirely through the United States Postal Service.
We haven't lived in the same city since 2003. We've continued to collaborate as we did when we were younger. We grew up in a house full of art.
I would say there wasn't much separation between art forms. And so I think there's this fluid back and forth that we have when it comes to the visual and the text-based and everything in between, not being always so genre specific or medium specific.
Our mother is an art therapist and our father is an indexer. He indexes books for a living.
We approached the show thinking again about what an index is. An index is a certain way of organizing data. And in this case, the data is the thousands of pieces of mail that we have exchanged over the course of these 15 years. One of the premises of the show is organizing that mail in a way that brings certain stories to the forefront and sort of makes certain visual or conceptual through lines more evident. One of the stories that we're telling is actually about the hand and the mark of the postal workers who deliver the mail. So there are a number of framed pieces which all highlight stamps that have been canceled by hand, which means that a mail worker, generally someone who is about to deliver the mail, might notice that the stamp has not run through the machine and been canceled, which means that it could potentially be used again. And so in order to prevent it from being used again, the postal worker will scribble over the stamp and thereby cancel it so that it is kind of expired. So there's a number of pieces in which we are highlighting that gesture, that mark of the postal worker, and have always really seen the individuals who we do not actually get to meet or encounter along the way. We always have considered them to be collaborators in this project. One of the things that I feel like the show has been about is looking at material that Anne-Marie has sent me, and instead of changing it or adding to it, it's actually more about organizing it and about treating it for what it is, but putting it into certain relationships with itself, reorganizing its relationship with other pieces around it.
Something interesting about an index is that though it purports to be key to the book for all users, it is obviously entirely subjective. Like an indexer is just a person with one view, and Julia is indexing, so to speak, mail that I've sent her by a number of different really subjective metrics.
It sometimes surprises people to know that much of what I send is written and much of what Anne-Marie sends is visual, even though in more of a public-facing way, I am the painter and Anne-Marie is the poet. This is a space that we can really swap roles or play both roles simultaneously and not worry so much about the categorization or the kind of medium specificity that sometimes pervades the industries that we're in.
I think that as artists, we can be too precious about things. I think that, time is limited, so we can not put our work into the world. And I think something that's really helpful about, collaborating with Julia and just collaborating through the mail in general is that it becomes not precious. Stuff becomes ephemeral. I can put something in the mail, either it will arrive or it won't arrive. It's a daily practice. It's about just making the work and moving on.
And it's also kind of about letting go and not knowing if this thing is going to arrive and or how it is going to arrive, what condition it will be in. So it's also about embracing the unknown, embracing spontaneity, and accepting failure as part of the creative process.
Much of our work with the mail is kind of about failure. Things show up ripped, arrive in these envelopes that say "We care," that are apologies that the mail has come, in some sort of disrepair.
There's one piece in the show, it's a black and white QR code, and mailed it in 72 parts. And over the course of the past few weeks, almost all of them have arrived, but not every single one. And so if they don't all arrive, that piece will forever have a missing section to it, which I think speaks to this kind of degree of uncertainty, playfulness, letting go that we are very much embracing through this medium.
The piece that Julia is talking about is also part of what we call a mail walk. I filmed Julia walking a large, unwieldy structure made of plexiglass with what we originally thought were QR codes, but are actually IBI codes, which are what the USPS uses for printed home postage. I filmed Julia walking it across the National Mall in Washington, D.C., to the old General Postal Office, which, after being decommissioned as such, became, among other things, the headquarters for the NEA, Waldorf Astoria, Trump International Hotel.
These walks that we do, which are like performances, but importantly, they're not performances that are in any way choreographed or planned. They're all improvised, and they're very much performances of endurance as much as they are creative and artistic ones. So the constraint is my own body's limits, my ability to walk a certain distance carrying a certain weight.
I don't strictly do this, but something I do love to do in poetry is kind of write in forms and traditional forms in sonnets, seeing how much that box of a traditional form can be stretched and can take. And when I'm working in this very delineated, strict box of a postcard, it's kind of the same. I have to see how much I can fit on this, this 4x6 or whatever piece of paper. I have to see how much 56 cents of a postcard stamp will actually carry through the mail. And I appreciate that constraint. We have kind of a code between us, an inside language. If we reach out to each other, it doesn't necessarily merit a response. It's both intimate and public. There's a sense that we'll always be there, and the relationship will sustain whatever messes come.
It feels like also in this year of 2025, that email and text messaging and all of these digital forms of communication are so prominent that the use of the mail gives us space to communicate in a way that doesn't necessarily merit a response. A lot of the things that we send are actually not about communicating anything of importance or of urgency. They are things that can just go out into the world and sit and just be. And I think that's a really hard condition to embrace in this day and age where everything needs to sort of be seen and received and acknowledged almost instantaneously. That's sort of the expectation around a lot of communication when it's digital. On the one hand, it is subject to a lot of surveillance, and I think we are interested in the fact that all of the things that are sent do get scanned, and actually some of the works are sort of a play on the idea of an object being scanned by a machine. But it is also one of those spaces that is completely analog and actually won't be summarized by AI, for instance, the way that like an email actually is. So it's both a space that is very sacred in terms of its sort of ability to hold privacy, but it's also like a very public space because on the other hand, like flat postcards that have two sides will get seen and read by potentially anybody. So it kind of holds both private and the very, very public facing identities in the same sentence.
Not only is the show and just like the 15-year collaboration, one of love between us as sisters, but it's also a love letter to the USPS, to the United States Postal Service, which this year, 2025, is celebrating its 250th anniversary. in some form delivering mail in this country, which does make it older than the country itself. We feel in this particular moment, it's important to celebrate the USPS and the postal workers who deliver mail every day because there are increasing calls for privatization of the Postal Service. Even though it's one of the biggest employers, public or private, in the country, I'd also love people to come away from the show with an appreciation for postal workers, who I feel like really are some of the most unsung heroes in our day to day.